Undoubtedly, the most significant event of the week was the mass missile launch on Israel by Iran. As always, everyone tries to squeeze the truth into the narrow corset of military censorship and tighten it with the belt of military propaganda. So, although everything seemed to happen in front of a wide audience, the understanding of what occurred remains quite vague and unreliable. It seems there were exactly 181 missiles, although initially reports mentioned 250, 400, and even 500. According to the Israeli side, there was one casualty. An unfortunate Arab passerby in Jericho was killed by the falling body of a downed missile. According to the Israeli side, 2 people were lightly injured, a couple of buildings in Tel Aviv were slightly damaged, and there were no military losses at all. Only some trash burned on the bases. The Iranians say otherwise. Supposedly, 20 F-35 fighters worth about $1.52 billion were destroyed at the airfield. Oil platforms in the Mediterranean Sea were hit. Military bases in Nevatim and Tel Nof were targeted. In Tel Aviv, a Mossad intelligence building was allegedly hit. God knows if this is true, but the Israeli air defense was clearly not focused on the missiles. It was apparently occupied with something more meditative and important than repelling the Iranian attack. Wits have already renamed the Iron Dome, which Israelis are very proud of, to the Iron Sieve. Completely unfair, by the way. Ballistic missiles are handled by the Patriot systems and the David Sling system. And the Iron Dome is specifically designed to destroy makeshift projectiles that Palestinians make from pieces of water pipes. Which, by the way, does not negate the following fact. Both the Sling and the Patriots turned out to be practically useless. There were many arrivals, and no visible obstacles were made to the Iranian missiles. There is suspicion that the Iranian missile attack was more of a formidable demonstration than a punitive strike. Previously, several times the Iranians announced the inevitability of their harsh response. This was after the death of one of the Hamas leaders in Tehran, after a preemptive attack in Lebanon, and finally after the assassination of Hezbollah leader Nasrallah. The delay in the retaliatory strike on Tel Aviv began to be perceived as weakness and readiness of the Persians to admit defeat. The missile salvo instantly reconfigured the roles in this confrontation. The Iranians demonstrated power and determination. The Israelis realized that the enemy is belligerent and ready for battle.
We must create a unified defense belt to protect the independence of all Islamic countries from Afghanistan to Yemen. The interests of protecting Islam determine our destiny. The defense of the Lebanese and Gaza residents is a legitimate right, which we have protected thanks to the brilliant work of our armed forces.
The lack of a destructive effect, by the way, may be intentional. Tehran merely showed that it is capable of inflicting unacceptable damage on the Jewish state and suggested backing down without forcing a serious counterstrike. And it seems the Israelis got the message. Initially, they promised to respond to the missile attack in a way that would make the Middle East tremble. Then they toned down their rhetoric and threatened to strike only Persian nuclear facilities. Finally, they remembered that they also have nuclear facilities, and meanwhile, their air defense is not particularly effective. In general, they also abandoned the demonstrative strike on the Persian non-peaceful atom. Amazingly, the missile launch seems to have lowered the tension. Everyone suddenly realized they were on the brink of mutual destruction. Even the Americans, who tied most of the contradictions in this region, are holding back their belligerent Israeli partners.
There is active discussion now about whether and how to respond to Iran. This still needs to be determined. We are in constant contact with the Israeli government.
Undoubtedly, the catastrophic processes in the region have not yet reversed, but there is a real chance for this. In headquarters, government situation rooms, and intelligence agencies, they are now intensely calculating how to ensure nothing remains of them, and we don't suffer for it. Fortunately, it seems neither side can solve this equation. Which, by the way, does not rule out war and bloodshed. The IDF invaded the border areas of Lebanon and continues to carry out missile and bomb strikes on targets in Beirut, Sidon, Tyre, and other cities. Israeli military have flooded the border regions. There's no room to move due to the armored vehicles. Every day there are reports of the deaths of new Hezbollah leaders. To get to the next one, the Israelis wipe out residential buildings with all their inhabitants, sometimes entire neighborhoods, both in Lebanon and Syria. Since the beginning of the conflict, according to official Beirut, more than 2,000 people have died. If, in pursuit of Hezbollah leader Nasrallah, They destroyed a residential complex with 80 tons of bombs. Then, trying to kill his successor, the Israelis literally wiped out several neighborhoods of Beirut along with their inhabitants. Meanwhile, Israel's Lebanese operation is neither bold nor swift. Even military censorship cannot hide the fact of the deaths of dozens of Israeli soldiers. The internet is full of footage showing countless wounded being evacuated by helicopters. Hezbollah commanders, like commanders of any army, prepared for the past war. But they did it thoroughly. They don't have drones with explosives, but they have a huge stockpile of grenades and mortars in their caches. So many that even smart Israeli weapons do not provide overwhelming superiority to the invading forces. For the life of one IDF soldier, Arabs pay with the lives of hundreds of Hamas members and dozens of Hezbollah fighters. However, such a ratio does not suit the Israelis, as it completely excludes the possibility of victory, primarily due to the numerical superiority of the Arabs. By killing indiscriminately, both peaceful and non-peaceful, the Israelis themselves create a continuously operating conveyor for recruiting recruits into enemy radical militant organizations. The situation is now frozen at a turning point. It can move either towards escalation or in the opposite direction.
If the Zionist state attacks us, the retaliation will be even more brutal than the previous one. The response will be proportional and carefully calculated. We did not start the conflict, we only responded to strikes on Iranian lands, on the Iranian consulate in Damascus, and responded to attacks on Iranian interests.
It must be understood that the current war was caused by Israel's purely internal political problems. Netanyahu's government was on the verge of resignation, and the prime minister faced a series of criminal cases. Last year's terrorist attack provoked a harsh response, far exceeding the power against the Palestinian territories. The feelings of revenge were satisfied, and an agreement on the release of hostages could have been reached without erasing Gaza from the face of the earth. In fact, the war continues only because its cessation threatens the Israeli government with 1,000 internal political problems.
Iran made a big mistake, and it will pay for it. Iran underestimates our determination to defend ourselves and avenge our enemies. Whoever attacks us, we will attack them. This applies to Judea and Samaria. This applies to Gaza, Lebanon, Yemen, and Syria. And Iran too. We will fight the axis of evil everywhere. Everywhere.
However, the country is getting deeper into the conflict, and the later it ends, the harder it will be for Israel to return to peaceful life. The country's economy is in a pre-heart attack state. There are no cheap labor hands, as the Palestinians have left, no tourists, investors, no cargo transit. People and money are flowing abroad, and both love silence. But the war economy is like a bicycle. It is stable only while it moves. Now, after the Iranian missile salvos, it's up to Israel. Whether there will be a catastrophe or not, it is up to them to decide. Oleg Romanov on the main broadcast.